What is
undermining and questioning America's own democracy? Let's bring David and Rick back into our conversation. So much to tease apart. Rick, I don't know if you want to start with Iran, the president saying that, answering a question about enforcement of this agreement, saying that he let Iran know that if they do not comply, he is going to bomb the hell out of them, or him standing on the world stage answering a question about Brazil by claiming America's own elections are, quote, rigged.
Yes, Alicia, it's difficult to watch. When it comes to the Iran nuclear agreement, there actually isn't one. There is no U.S.-Iran nuclear agreement. As David and I have been looking at the text of the agreement, there's barely a mention of nuclear enrichment. There's no mechanism, as you mentioned, of enforcement for what's happening, other than Trump saying that he will bomb them. So it's an agreement to continue negotiations, and it's not a peace treaty. It's certainly not going to end difficulties in the Middle East. As we were talking about it earlier, there's nothing about the ballistic missiles that Iran has. And that's the thing that worries the Israelis. That's the thing that worries the Gulf countries. And the Gulf countries are supposedly the ones that are going to support this $300 billion investment fund in Iran, which is exponentially larger than any money that the Obama administration gave to the Iranians.
David, I want you to speak to the chyron that's currently on the lower third of our screen, the fact that the president was asked if he would stay potentially to sign this page-and-a-half agreement, and he joked that it actually was better for him to have Vance do it that way. If it turned out well, he'd take the credit, and if it didn't, he could throw Vance under the bus. That has seemed to be the design. I'm just surprised that he's saying the quiet part out loud.
Yeah, I think, he may have been joking, but the broad theme here is the president seems to express very little concern for the long-term future of the Republican Party. The joking this way about JD Vance, I've heard from multiple sources, many outlets have reported this. JD Vance vehemently opposed the war with Iran, yet he is volunteering, he said a version of this publicly, to support the president he serves. And so JD Vance would now be going to sign an MOU that, as Rick was just saying, is a defeat for the United States. It's not sure it's even going to hold together, but it's a tremendous win for Iran. And then to have, so he's showing tremendous loyalty, J.D. Vance, to Donald Trump, and then to have Donald Trump joke about what impact that's going to have on the future of the Republican Party, on J.D. Vance himself, and now as, senators. So when we get into this.
What were they thinking, I guess, is what I really want to know.
I don't know. And it was just startling to me today, the tone the president used in the press conference. All these things he'd said for months. He talked about how American bombing had devastated Iran's regime and how it even threatened that we were going to drop bombs on their heads. And then later in the press conference, he said, the bombing really didn't do anything. Dropping $1 billion didn't achieve much, so why should we keep doing that? The really valuable thing was the naval blockade we created. And then he said, in terms of missiles, again, at the beginning of the war, Iran should not have any missiles. Its missile industry should be raised from the ground. And today he's like, well, Saudi Arabia has missiles, and it would be unfair for Iran to not have missiles. So it was this incredible change of tone from the president. And I think I got a meme from a former CIA officer about the broader message here to other rivals and threats to our country that at this point, Iceland, according to the meme, is eager to get into a war with Trump, hoping it can get the same deal that Iran got.
I mean, it's so bad. It's the punchline of jokes being told by the New York Post. I mean, Paul Rieckhoff, I don't understand how we're in a place where this train just sort of rumbles along, obviously off the tracks, obviously with no braking system, obviously with no regard for the 13 men and women of the military who paid with their lives, to leave the United States of America in a weaker position where we are the butt of jokes. Countries want to go to war with us.
Yeah, we're all along for the ride on Trump's crazy train of destruction and mayhem. And this is a loser's agreement. This is a surrender. This is a concession. This is awful. This weakens our standing in the world. I think it's a disgrace to the military that's been ramped up for this and told that this is such an existential threat and such an important fight. What does Trump say to the 13 families of the troops that were killed in this operation, the troops that have been wounded? Every single objective that he put forward to the world and to this country has not been met. And the regime is still in place, and now he's acting like they're a group of people that are reasonable and we can negotiate with after they slaughtered their own people. He did this with Putin, too. I mean, the problem here is we have the videotape. We can go back and see his own words, and there's no spinning this or selling this, and I think it's time for Congress and the American people especially to hold him accountable. And keep in mind, he wants to go further. He wants to go hit Cuba. So let's keep this in mind as he starts to ramp up for Cuba, that maybe we should have a War Powers Act before he strikes Cuba instead of afterward like we did in Iran and Venezuela.
David Rode, two-part question. One, what, if any, is the prospect for that? And two, let me just add the new dynamic here, which is that the most blistering attacks are coming from the right in American politics. This is a tweet by a right-wing Washington Post columnist, quote, $300 billion to Iran under any circumstances is a disaster, like offering the Marshall Plan to rebuild Germany while the Nazis were still in power. So we have Mark Deason making the Nazi comparison and telling the Nazi joke about Trump today.
Yeah, it's extraordinary, and the whole question though is, and there are Republicans that are pushing back against this, but Senator Lindsey Graham, and maybe I missed another tweet from him, sort of said he talked today with Steve Witkoff, the president's envoy, and he thinks that signing the MOU is like a step in the right direction, and he said he hopes this can all lead to a comprehensive agreement. So I guess I'm skeptical of, Republicans are really going to push back on this. Tom Tillis did push back much more aggressively. But I just want to emphasize, this isn't like we're comparing the Trump nuclear deal with Iran to the Obama nuclear deal. There is no Trump nuclear deal with Iran. There is nothing in this agreement that actually decides anything or restricts or changes Iran's nuclear program. It's literally the language you were reading. The status quo continues with Iran's nuclear program. So I think as time goes by, there'll be more opposition. And then lastly, there's going to be opposition from Israel. I don't know how an Israeli can listen to him joke about, or even a Saudi, frankly, or an Emirati, that it's no big deal if Iran has these missiles when, they can menace the whole region with them.
I'm going to bring into our coverage Ian Bremmer. Ian Bremmer is the founder and president of the Eurasia Group, which is a global political risk research and consulting firm, and someone we turn to on momentous days like this. Your reaction?
Yeah, it is probably the single biggest foreign policy failure of the Trump administration. Nothing else is even close. He has not been able to achieve any of his war aims. What we saw today was basically undoing some of the damage that was done by the war. So we no longer have active hostilities between the U.S. and Iran. That's good. We're going to have the Strait reopened that was open before the war. It's been closed because of the war. That's good, and everyone is happy to see it. By the way, there's also, in the first paragraph of this agreement, it says that there's no more war in Lebanon, but the Israelis are not a signatory, neither is Hezbollah. So the United States doesn't actually have jurisdiction or control over the conflict to make that commitment. So in some ways, it's kind of a stillborn deal to begin with. And I can understand why Trump didn't want the 14 points to be made public. Frankly, it'd be better for him if we still didn't have them. Because now that you're reading through all of it, it's very hard to deny. And the outcomes are, it's better than continuing the war. So, Trump did finally take the off-ramp. He should have taken the off-ramp a month or 2 months ago. The same deal would have been offered to him. The Iranians clearly understood that the United States had no stomach for continuing this fight. And that's, by the way, that's why there's very little reason to believe that they will go ahead for a final agreement that would...
to replace all the weapons and ammunition that we used in the Iran war that's not a war. Americans should be grateful to have spent so much of their own money on high gas prices and inflation caused by the war that is not a war that we won dozens of times and almost have had a peace deal for the 40th time. We'll see if that happens on Friday. The noble purpose of this war that is not a war was to free the Iranian people who have not been freed from a regime that needed change and still remains in place. And most importantly, of all things, is Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. So that is why we will most likely not be removing the enriched uranium from the facilities buried deep underground that we bombed before and Iran rebuilt, because we bombed them again and it's too hard to reach, even though we are the best and the only ones who can do it. And the world should be thankful that because this peace deal is almost done, for the 40th time, the Strait of Hormuz will now be reopened, just as it was open before the war that is not a war. Most importantly, there will be a $300 billion Iran rebuilding fund, even though they said there wasn't, but there's going to be, that certain super duper special people can donate to and most likely be awarded contracts so they can become even richer and more elite than they already are, all to make Iran great again after we bombed them in the war that is not a war. All of this would never be possible without the peace president, whom established the Board of Peace and appointed himself the head of the board without term limits right before he waged the Iran war that is not a war. Now that he is on the verge of securing peace for the 40th time after defeating Iran dozens of times, he must be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize.
Donald Trump may be facing a challenge that has hurt many political leaders before him: declining support from within his own party. Throughout American politics, party loyalty often depends on one thing: political strength. When a leader appears powerful and successful, allies tend to stay quiet and fall in line. But when that leader begins to look vulnerable, criticism often starts to emerge. We have seen this pattern before. Following the 2022 midterm elections, many Republicans openly questioned Trump's influence after several of his endorsed candidates underperformed for a brief period. Some Republican figures even explored alternative leaders for the future of the party. However, as Trump regained political momentum, much of that criticism faded and many Republicans returned to supporting him. Now, some observers believe a similar shift may be happening again. Recent controversies, international disagreements, and growing concerns about future elections have led some Republican lawmakers, former officials, and conservative commentators to speak more openly about their differences with Trump. For many politicians, the calculation is simple. They are focused on their own political futures and are asking whether staying closely aligned with Trump will help or hurt them in upcoming elections. This doesn't mean the Republican Party is abandoning Trump. He remains one of the most influential figures in conservative politics. But it does suggest that some members of the party are becoming more willing to publicly distance themselves when they believe it serves their political interests. As the next election cycle approaches, these divisions could become even more visible. And the key question for Republicans may be whether Trump's influence remains strong enough to unite the party, or whether more leaders looking for a path beyond Trump.